Good evening, and thank you for joining this webinar presentation of the National Catholic Educational Association, The Final Cry for Help, Bullying, Related Suicides, and Other Acts of Desperation, presented by Jodee Blanco. I'm Andrea Kopp, Assistant Director of Professional Development for NCEA, and I'm happy to be your moderator and host today. Just a few housekeeping notes as we get started. Please note that your microphone connections have been muted. If you have questions or comments during today's presentation, please send those through the chat box that appears in your GoToWebinar control panel. To ask a question or make a comment, use your mouse to click into the blank box area, type your question with your keyboard, and then click send. Jodee will be on webcam today. If you'd like to expand that viewing area, just click and drag the borders of the box to make her larger or smaller. If the viewing area disappears at any time, just click on your GoToWebinar icon or control panel and it should come right back up. The webinar presentation is going to last about an hour this evening, and there'll be opportunities for questions and answers. You can post your questions or comments for Jodee at any time. You don't have to wait till the end of the webinar. And we'll also be live tweeting during this hour, so you can join the conversation on Twitter using the hashtag NCEA webinars, and be sure to tag at NCEA Talk. Immediately following the webinar, you'll be prompted to complete a brief survey about your experience, and we thank you in advance for providing us with this valuable feedback. You will receive an email tomorrow with instructions on how to access this recording, the presentation materials, and your certificate of attendance. You can also download those files during the webinar from the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel. Let us begin, as we do all things, in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter, Jodee Blanco. Jodee is a New York Times best-selling author of Please Stop Laughing at Me. She is a bullying survivor and travels across the country speaking to educators, school leaders, and students as an anti-bullying advocate. Thank you, Jodee, so much for being here this evening.
Oh, no, thank you. I am honored to be here. And I'm really grateful to everyone who's shown up and given me some of their evening. I will try to make it as meaningful as possible.
And we're all set for you, Jodee, whenever you're ready.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I dipped out or not. Hi, everybody. My name is Jodee. For those of you who may not know about my background, I'll share a little bit with you. From 5th grade through high school, I was the kid that nobody wanted to be caught dead hanging out with. I struggled to fit in for the same reason that maybe some of your students are struggling too, simply for being different. My school years were a nightmare. And I never imagined I would write a book about it, or that thousands of kids would start reaching out to me from all across the country asking for my help, but that's what happened. So I gave up my business career and I started traveling to schools, answering those cries one at a time. And that morphed into a program I do called InJets, Not Just Joking Around, where I travel to schools and I do student, faculty, and parent presentations and a curriculum to sort of motivate change and save lives. And I've done this for over 500,000 students, teachers, and parents worldwide. Something really interesting has happened during the course of these last 15 years that I've been doing this. I discovered that the world may change, but the adolescent heart, the heart of a child, remains the same. It beats for acceptance, to belong. It beats for friendship. And when you deny a child that acceptance, the pain can become so severe that it can lead them to hurt themselves or others. Bullying-related suicides are something I know more than a little about, because when I was in school, I wanted to die. And it's interesting because I often get asked by teachers and students and parents, what was the worst part about being bullied? And I always answer the same way, and it surprises everybody, that the worst part of being bullied wasn't the acceptance and friendship. It wasn't the bullying itself. It wasn't the abuse I was taking as much as it was all the acceptance and friendship that I kept trying to give my classmates, and they kept throwing it back in my face. After a while, it backed up into my system and poisoned my whole spirit. Every day during the school year, I am holding sometimes hundreds of hurting kids in my arms. Half of them are victims of bullying, seeking affirmation and just a place to unload their burden. But the other half are the bullies. They're in pain too. We always talk about how, bullying can motivate some of its victims to contemplate or complete suicide. But we rarely talk about when the bullies take their own lives. Well, tonight we're going to talk about it all. I'm going to share with you what I feel you need to know to save a life. It's interesting. The typical profile of the bullied student is what I call the ancient child. The ancient child is a child that is usually more verbally and socially gifted than his or her peers. They have a terrific command of vocabulary. They act so mature on the outside that adults automatically assume that they are that emotionally mature. These are the students who often sit alone at lunch or walk to class alone, and they will tell you that they prefer socializing with their parents' friends than the kids at school because they think their classmates are immature. Don't be fooled. These kids may tell you that they really don't want to socialize with their classmates. I was one of those kids, and deep down I can tell you that I would have given anything if they would have opened up their arms to me. So I made excuses to my own self of why it was okay that they didn't, but those excuses never took. They never really worked. It's one of the reasons why I struggled so much with suicide and self-harm. And you see, there's a myth about bullying-related suicides. A lot of adults believe that the reason bullied kids will either contemplate or complete suicide is because of the bullying itself, the teasing, the abuse, the constant assailing of their self-esteem. But that's not it. Yes, that contributes to the suffering for sure, but it's the loneliness, it's the isolation, it's the feeling that nobody understands me. I'm always going to be a freak. My parents don't get me. The kids at school don't get me. Nobody gets me. I'm never, ever going to fit in anywhere. It's that desperate loneliness that drives them to fateful acts. One of the biggest mistakes that parents and teachers make when dealing with bullying that can and often does lead to suicide, and it's well-intentioned and it's an innocent mistake, but you find out a child is being bullied. And bear in mind, there are two kinds of bullied students. There's the overtly bullied student who's bullied in all the obvious ways, cyberbullied, digitally bullied, physically bullied, teased. But then you have the invisible student. The invisible student isn't necessarily bullied per se. They're not even necessarily excluded on purpose. They're just the kids who sort of disappear into the woodwork. They're kind of like ghosts in their own skin. In some ways, those kids suffer more and deeper irreparable damage. Why? Because if someone is hitting me or spitting at me or calling me horrible names over and over, I can say to myself, There's something wrong with that person. But if all someone ever does to me is look past me and through me instead of at me, who never talks with me, only ever about me, who pretends I literally do not exist, who won't acknowledge me in any way, it's not going to make me say to myself, there's something wrong with that person. It's going to make me say to myself, there's something wrong with me. And it's likely I'll think that possibly my whole life. Well, back to what we were saying before, one of the biggest mistakes that adults make when dealing with bullying, whether it's the overtly bullied student or the invisible student that I just shared with you, the first thing you do, because you care about the student and you want to jump into action and do something, is that you immediately address it on the institutional level. So you set up a meeting with the principal and the superintendent, and you talk to the parents of the victims, and you talk to the parents of the bullies, and you try to set up a meeting between all parties, and you talk to the school psychologist. And it always strikes me as ironic. Think about this. When there's a bullying situation at a school, the big immediate emphasis is on appropriately punishing the bullies. And in fact, parents of the victims will bully the school, literally, into punishing the bullies. And the problem with that is that all this attention, energy, and focus is being funneled into punishment of the bullies. Meanwhile, bleeding spiritually is the victim, that lonely, desperate victim who feels completely isolated and completely alone and utterly misunderstood. Now, I'm not saying that these things over here aren't important. I'm not saying that at all. But if you're excited because you were finally able to confirm a meeting with the parents of the bullies and the parents of the victims and all the proper school administrators, and everybody has voiced that they really want to work together, and you're feeling so positive about this, as you should, and the meeting is scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon, and Wednesday night at 10 p.m., you get word that that lonely bullied student took her own life. When everyone's at the funeral, is anyone going to remember or even care about that meeting that was confirmed for 2 o'clock that Thursday? The first thing you need to do in a bullying situation, if you find out a student is either being bullied or invisibilized, is to perform triage on that victim. Triage consists of something very simple. It's called interim social life. You need to give that child hope that there is somewhere he or she can fit in, that there is somewhere they can belong, where they can contribute something and feel a part of something larger than themselves. So part of doing that is I always encourage teachers and administrators to do a little research. Take an hour one weekend, or get together with some of your colleagues and divide this into individual tasks. But take about an hour on a weekend. Jump on your laptop and research organized activities for kids in your community. But go one town over or one parish over to guarantee that whatever activities you find, it will feature kids who don't attend school with your bullied student. Start with Park District activities. They offer everything from teen community theater and gardening clubs and dance to cheer and POMs. Then try community libraries. They have readers theater, writing clubs. Then try the private sector, dance studios, rock fantasy camps, martial arts schools, yoga schools. And just as you find these things, print it up and make a packet and staple it or clip it, and then make like maybe 10 copies of this packet and keep it in your desk. And when you're doing an intervention with a bullied student, hand them this packet of materials and say, why don't you go through this and choose something that you think you might really enjoy. Here's what that activity is going to do. It will give that student a lifeline outside of school. On the days when school feels extra unbearable, that student can say to himself, yeah, but I'm going to see my real friends at Park District play practice, or whatever it is. And it also helps this student realize that there's a whole giant world out there, that life doesn't just have to be school. And everybody, think about when we were kids. If you really think about it, if you really envision that time in your life, if you need help envisioning it, inhale a perfume that reminds you of that period. For me, it's Love's Baby Soft. Or inhale any scent that reminds you of that time. Strawberry lip gloss for me. And bring yourself back and really think about when you were that age. School was your whole world. I mean, you were there practically your whole life. There didn't seem to be any life outside of school. So imagine a lonely, bullied student who's miserable in that life and doesn't see anything beyond it. So that's what this activity will do. Additionally, it will give your student more social confidence. And the more confident a student is, the less of a target he will be. Also, and you know this because you're educators, bullied and invisible students tend to emit like this desperate aura. They're so desperate to be liked that they try too hard. And the harder they try, the more it pushes their classmates away. And when they stop trying so hard, when they're a little bit more relaxed because their need for acceptance is getting met somewhere else, so they're not as desperate to get it met at school, they're less tense, they're less intense. And as that desperation diminishes, their classmates will often come around. And most importantly, everyone, it will give you the time you need to deal with all these issues over here. Because I'm not saying that these issues over here aren't important, because they are. But the most important thing is to first give that suffering child hope. Because every day that they lose more hope of friendship, of feeling connected to the world, of feeling like they're just not a freak, every day that goes by that they don't have that hope, they are one breath closer to doing the unthinkable. I know, because I was on suicide watch all the time. Now we're going to talk about bullies who are potentially in danger of hurting themselves. But before we go there, I want to chat with you about the two types of popular kids in a school. It's important to know because the one type can be responsible for behavior that can make a kid crack. The elite leader is a member of the cool crowd. They're kind and inclusive, and they're not mean-spirited. The elite tormentor is their mean counterpart. The elite tormentor is the mean member of the cool crowd. The elite tormentor is the kid who's controlling, who uses acceptance like a weapon that they can either give or deny. You guys know this student. This is the student who is often the most popular kid at school. They often have very powerful, successful parents. Often they are the most active in extracurricular activities. They thrive at everything they try. They have the most distinct and specific plans for the future. They respect their elders. They raise their hands in class. They get good grades. In fact, these kids are often the kids that the school and the PTA is the most proud of and loves to sort of showcase at events, at orientation events. And no one suspects that some of these kids are sending other students home in tears every day, not by virtue of the acts of cruelty they commit, as much as because of the friendship and acceptance they insidiously deny. Elite tormentors are probably one of the most catalytic influences in suicide thoughts among bullying victims, because think about it. You're a kid. You're an ancient child, old for your age. It's hard for you to connect with other kids socially. You're probably creatively gifted. You respect your elders. You don't like to get in trouble. You're a good kid. That's an old soul. And yet inside, you want to be invited to that party on Friday. You want those cool kids to ask you to sit with them at lunch, and you pretend like it doesn't matter, but it does. And then those elite tormentors start to pump up the volume on their rejection. It's not the things they say, it's the looks they give you when you're walking down the hall that make you run to the bathroom and check your hair and check your makeup and check your clothing and check your shoes, because they make you so self-conscious you can't breathe. By the way, that's another form of bullying in schools, purposefully making other students so self-conscious that they can't think straight. And then with smartphones, they take photos of these kids at their most self-conscious, or taking a bite of food at lunch, and then they upload them and share them with everyone and use them to humiliate. Elite tormentors, that's what they do. And for the student who struggles with their abuse and struggles with their rejection, that student, if they are at risk of suicide, they need that triage. They need that interim social life. They need that help. Now, how do you determine if a student is suicidal? Now, let's tick through the obvious signs first, and I'm sure you all know them. Depression, sadness, lethargy, increased multiple absences, a decrease in grades, sullenness, overreactiveness, inexplicable spurts of anger, weight loss or weight gain. Those are kind of the obvious signs, right? And we all know those. But let's talk about the signs that a lot of adults don't really consider. Yes, kids' grades can go down, but there's the flip side of that coin. A sudden increase in grades can also be a sign that a child is being bullied and getting really desperate. Why? Because when you're being bullied and the world is folding in on you and the loneliness is becoming more of a burden than ever, sometimes you will just immerse yourself into schoolwork because it's a way to feel better about yourself. And you can say to yourself, well, maybe if I get straight A's, things will get better. And then you get those straight A's, you achieve that goal, and when things still aren't any better, then you can crash and go deeper into that dark place than you were before you started. Also, sudden, inexplicable makeover attempts. The preppy student who's suddenly starting to dress goth, or vice versa. The clean-cut student who suddenly is putting henna tattoos in obvious places, or tinting their hair orange, or spiking their hair, or painting their fingernails black. Just evidence of makeover attempts that aren't consistent with what you know that student's personality to be. Also, faking illness or making themselves sick to avoid school. For example, when things were really bad with me, I was terrified to go to school because I was getting physically threatened, and I couldn't face it. And I remember one day at school, no one would let me sit with them at lunch. Like, all of a sudden, my classmates decided that I could not sit at anyone's table. And I was so devastated by that, they literally ran me out of the lunchroom. There were no adults who did much back then. And I remember going into the girls' bathroom and sitting on the floor and just weeping. And when I got home from school that day, my parents were still at work. I went into my bedroom. I closed the door. I turned on my stereo, and I started screaming into my pillow until my throat burned so bad that it was red and raw. And then when my parents came home from school, I showed them my throat and I said, look, I can't go to school this week. I have strep throat. It's against the law to go to school with strep throat because it's contagious. That was a desperate time. I would literally have preferred anything, maybe even including, in my mind at the time, going to heaven, than having to go to school. So if you have any students who are going to the nurse's office a lot or making themselves sick, that's an indication that you have a student on the edge of crisis. The interim social life approach, I can't tell you how vital that is, because for that student, if you deny them hope long enough, they can become so hopeless that they self-harm. I mean, I was a cutter, and I didn't cut because it was a control thing. I cut because the pain in my heart was so intense that physical pain was a distraction. So pay attention to cutting also. And one of the biggest clues there is a basic one. If the weather's warm and you have students who are wearing long sleeves, that's an almost dead giveaway that you've got a classic cutter there. So pay attention to what they're wearing. Are they covering up any parts of their arms or places where one might normally cut? That's another sign that you may have a suicidal student or a severely bullied student who's turned to cutting. Now, I want to talk about the bully as well. The bully is bleeding. I know that bullying, acts of bullying, appear to be acts of hatred or acts of aggression. But I promise you, that is an illusion. Bullying is a cry for help. One of the things that I tell students in my student presentations, and again, they're age appropriate, so the elementary is much more, say, whimsical than the middle and the high school, but I communicate the same basic messages. I just adjust them and the delivery and the content of that delivery and context based on the ages. Well, one of the things that I always tell kids is that bullying, it may feel like that person hates you, but I promise you, if somebody is mean to you, whether it's your BFF trying to get everyone in your friend group to turn on you with a lot of nasty drama, or whether it's somebody at school who just is bullying you like a schoolyard bully, I promise, I tell these kids, it's not because that person hates you. It's because something else is going on in that person's life that you probably don't know about, that's making them really scared and really angry. And they're bringing all that fear and anger to school, and they're acting out. Bullying, I tell kids and adults, is a cry for help. And the only way you're ever going to curb bullying in your school is to answer that cry. I tell kids that tattling hurts and telling helps. I explain that tattling is about revenge, just wanting to get that bully into trouble. Telling is something else. Telling is when you help everyone, because if you tell, then that bully will get the support they've been crying out for in their acts of bullying. Sometimes the best way to make a point is with a story, a true story. The best example I can give you of this, about bullying being a cry for help, and I mean, I have a gajillion of them, but this is a good one. When I was in 7th grade, there was this kid named Roger who had Downs. And one day, this group of popular kids, led by a boy named Jerry, they were harassing him. They were actually throwing dirt in his eyes. And I intervened and made them stop. They got into trouble for that, and they didn't like that at all. And that same day after school, there had been a snowstorm. It was a freak storm, and my mom was running late to pick me up. And I couldn't take the school bus anymore because I got so hassled on the school bus. So I'm waiting for my mom to pick me up. And Jerry and his clique of friends, there were about 4 guys and 3 girls plus he, they cornered me in the parking lot, and they held me down, and they shoved snowballs down my shirt and down my ears and down my throat until I started to gag, and they got scared and left. Well, Jerry got a 10-day suspension for that. And I was happy. I thought he deserved it. And, you know, I didn't even remember at the time, but when he came back from that suspension, he was like way skinnier. But we all just assumed that he was just trying to do a different weight class in wrestling. Well, years later, after I wrote Please Stop Laughing at Me, and I had long forgiven my bullies, and I would see them often in my hometown, I bumped into Jerry's best friend, Tommy, who was there when they did that snowball attack on me. And he said, "Oh my gosh, Jode, I just read your book. It was really hard for me." And I was like, "That's okay. I'm good with that." And he smiled and he said, No, you don't understand. You timestamp the chapters." I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, when I was reading the book and read about that snowball fight, I realized that's when Jerry's dad lost his job and couldn't afford to feed that family." He said that night after the snowball fight, the rest of the kids and I went back to my house for spaghetti. And when we were eating, we were distracted by something on TV, and we ran into the living room, and Jerry stayed behind. And when we got back to the kitchen, all of our plates had been practically licked clean, and he had spaghetti sauce all over his shirt. And we just thought he was being a smart aleck. And I realized when I read your book, he wasn't being a smart aleck. His dad was out of work, and that poor kid must have been so hungry. And then what did that principal do? He subjected Jerry to more torture. He suspended him. At home, Jerry couldn't get any food. At least at school, the cafeteria workers, would give him lunch even if he couldn't pay for it. Years later, Jerry would struggle with suicide, drugs, addictive behaviors. It would take him well into adulthood to heal from these wounds. There was this girl in my school who was, I thought at the time, the devil. She invited me to a party once, and I was so excited. And my mom took me to get my makeup done and my hair done. And when we got to the address of where the party was, it was an empty parking lot at a forest preserve where all the kids came out and said, yeah, like we'd ever invite you. I never forgot that. Well, years later, I found out that the girl who did that, she didn't hate me. Just like Jerry didn't hate me. Jerry was hungry. And she didn't hate me. Her dad killed himself in the car in their driveway at home, practically in front of her. And her mother wouldn't let her talk to anybody about this because this was the 70s. So she and her sister had to keep it to themselves. And they were constantly getting in trouble, detention, suspensions, you name it. And eventually, her sister did take her own life. And I can't help but wonder, why didn't those administrators exercise a different approach? The bully is bleeding too. In the media, we all talk about the victims of bullying who take their own lives, but rarely the bullies who do. And I can tell you this, the most powerful tool that you have in your arsenal as an educator to work against self-harm and suicide is one simple word: curiosity. Be curious. If you're dealing with a kid who's mean and cruel and insensitive, be curious. Find out as much about that bully's backstory as you physically, humanly can. Because the more you find out, the more compassion you will feel for that child. And the more compassion you feel for the bully, the more effective you're going to be as an interventionist. Bullies are already bleeding. They don't need to be beaten down any more than life has already beaten them. If you lift them up, if you give them concrete opportunities to access their empathy and develop it like a muscle, to transcend the abuses of their lives that we probably know nothing about, that they then bring to school and act out. All this can be achieved if you just engage some curiosity. Imagine if my principal would have asked Jerry what was wrong, and he would have just looked at him and said, "Gee, sir, I'm really hungry and it's making me mad." What could have been done for that kid and his family? Imagine if the dean would have asked my arch nemesis in school, "Gee, why are you doing all these mean things?" She might have said, if he was persistent enough, "Well, I guess I'm just messed up because of this thing with my dad." And then imagine the help and support they could have gotten. The best way, we've talked about what to do with the victim of bullying, that we need to perform triage and we need to find them an interim social life. But then how do we deal with the bully? How do we get to that bully and rehabilitate and heal that bully before the bully gets to a point that he's done so much damage and he's been so cruel that in addition to the pain that was driving him to that cruelty in the first place, he also now is carrying guilt that can often be the final nail in the psychological coffin. So how do we prevent that? How do we get our fingers in there and stop this from happening? Well, traditional punishment doesn't work. It only makes an angry child angrier and an insensitive child more insensitive. I advocate supplementing traditional punishment with something I call compassionate discipline. And compassionate discipline, everyone, is so simple. All it is creating innovative opportunities where kids can access their empathy and develop it like a muscle. Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say, for example, that you have a group of kids at your school that I typically call the Abercrombie tormentors. These are the kids, and almost every school has this friend group. These are the kids whose parents often are more affluent than some of their neighbors, and they have a certain amount of influence and power in the community. And these kids sometimes look down on their lesser fortunate classmates. They may not even bully them in any overt ways, but they thumb their nose at them. They don't invite them to anything. They look at them and roll their eyes as they pass them in the hallways and then crack up. Well, what do you do? I mean, how do you punish a group of kids anyway for not inviting someone to sit with them at lunch, or for not inviting someone to their sleepover on Friday? You really can't punish someone for things they don't do, right? But here's what you can do. Get an activity bus and a chaperone and take those kids on a special field trip to a local homeless shelter. And each of the members of that clique have to interview those homeless people about their dreams and aspirations and how they got derailed. And then they have to write a letter of encouragement. They each have to pick one resident and write a letter of encouragement. And then they have to come up with an idea of how they can make the people in that shelter feel validated on a human level. Maybe it's painting a mural with the art teacher in the foyer, or putting on a really cool talent show with the drama teacher. But something that makes those people feel valued. And I promise, if you have a group of kids who are cruel in subtle ways to their lesser fortunate classmates, if they're exposed to real people who truly have no one and nothing in this world, they're far less likely to look down on the kids who shop at Goodwill instead of Pink again. See, there's another possibility here for you too. Detentions, lunch detentions, in-school suspensions. Now, this is one of the most awesome and underrated opportunities for schools in America. Think about it. When you're doing in-school detentions and in-school suspensions, you've got these kids captive for a set period of time. That's such an amazing opportunity. And it seems so silly to squander it on homework and studying. Instead, maybe find opportunities where you can use those in-school detentions and suspensions to compassionatize your students and deepen their humanity. For example, and this is just off the cuff, but let's say that you have a student who is just mean and insensitive. She's cruel, she's angry, she's cruel, and she's probably, like I said, crying out for help because she's angry about something at home. So first, of course, we have to be curious and find out how we can help her. But instead of doing a normal, let's say she has a week's worth of lunch detentions, okay? Instead of doing the normal studying, maybe have her do a little research about a local animal shelter, and maybe have the manager of the shelter come and do a little presentation, or maybe he sent her some video of the animals in the cages, and then she has to come up with an idea of how she can help those animals. Maybe it's doing an awareness campaign, and during that detention she makes posters throughout the school and for the parish about adopt an animal. Or maybe she writes a little op-ed piece for the church bulletin, encouraging people to adopt instead of buying a pet. Or maybe she does a little fundraiser, but something that helps someone else, that makes her feel good about herself. You could even, if you want to get really creative about it, you could tie it into something she's already doing academically. Like, for example, if she's studying Martin Luther King in social studies class, maybe she does something that she would consider similar to what he was trying to do. You know, but if you can just look at detentions and suspensions, the in-school version, as this opportunity to help kids connect with their compassion, and connect with their humanity, you can save a life. You can save a life of the bully because you catch that bully before they fall completely. And you can certainly save the life and the futures of their victims. Another example, bullies, sometimes it's hard for them to come forward and talk about what's wrong, and it's equally hard for victims to come forward. So when I go into schools, one of the things I teach, and I have a follow-up curriculum to my live presentations when I go into schools that schools can adopt that keeps the message alive all year long. And the point of this follow-up curriculum is to help kids understand themselves better, understand adults better, and to communicate better. And the core aspect of this curriculum is creative enhancements to existing subject matter. So let me give you a little example. I'm going to pull something from the curriculum, just a small piece that you could start implementing right this second if you're up for it. You can incorporate quiz questions, homework assignments, class activities into existing required subject matter, existing required curriculum that not only imparts vital life lessons to kids, but helps you gain more insight into if your students may be in jeopardy or at risk of dark feelings or not. Here's an example. When I'm in my faculty workshop, one of the things I recommend is these curriculum enhancements. And one of my suggestions is, let's say, this is just a sort of kind of example that I give to get people's creative juices flowing. So that's what I'm doing here with you. So let's say that you're a science teacher and you're studying, you're taking your kids through the food chain. So you give a quiz. So question number 1 might be, who invented the concept of the food chain and in what year? 2, what was the scientific community's initial response to this concept and why? Question number 3, if the social atmosphere at our school were the food chain, where would you fit on the food chain and why? Your students' answers to that question will give you insight into the students individually, into your classroom dynamic, and even into the school dynamic as a whole. There was a teacher, a 7th grade biology teacher, who decided to try it, and he actually incorporated that question into one of his quizzes. And one of his 7th grade students, a boy, answered by detailing his plan to kill everybody in his science class because he was so tired of them putting him down all the time. And in his answer to the quiz question, he said that he had a knife in his locker and he was going to use it. Well, of course, the teacher intervened, the school intervened, and they found the knife. They brought me in as a consultant, and we were able to get this student placed in a really good facility for kids to help him. His parents were able to get him the help he needed. He was diagnosed with a depressive disorder, and he was treated successfully, and he's okay now. And so are the kids that he was targeting. All because a teacher decided to look at his existing required curriculum from a fresh new perspective. Look, I know how hard it is to be an educator. I taught myself for years. And I know that with standardized testing and all of the pressure from administration and how rushed everything is and dealing with parents, that sometimes we just are so focused on getting through each day and making our mark each day and making sure these kids have learned what they need to learn today, because if not, it's only going to build up and get worse. I get that, I do. All I'm suggesting is that if you can look at ways to make your existing required subject matter personally relevant to these kids, find opportunities, 1 quiz question a month, 1 homework assignment every 2 weeks that connects or that ties in what they're currently doing to something personal. it can give you insights into your students, and it might help you catch if a student is in a dark place and he hasn't told anyone. Kids are pretty simple. When you encourage them to open up in an unexpected way, and they don't feel as if their backs are against the wall, you'd be stunned what can come out. Another great thing, if you're an English teacher, do a poetry writing contest. But instead of making the kids adhere to a strict, like, iambic pentameter or a haiku, tell them the assignment is to be as creative as possible and encourage them to break all the rules. It may not be great for learning about poetry, but it will be great for you in learning about the poetry of their pain. For some of these kids, you're the only anchor that they have. And I'll leave you with this about truth and compassion. There are times when I'm at a school and I don't know what to do. I'm faced with something that's so awful that I'm scared. I was at a school and I had just given a student presentation, and there was a lot of pain in that school, and I was doing a lot of interventions. And I went to the ladies' room just honestly to catch my breath. And there was this girl, 8th grade, in the bathroom. And she had her wrists, and she had 2 Band-Aids on her wrists, and the blood had seeped through. And I ran over to her and I said, "Sweetheart, what happened?" And she said, "Well, I felt really bad this morning, and so I tried to cut my wrists. And my mom said to stop being so dramatic, and she put Band-Aids on and made me go to school." So I gently took the girl out of the bathroom, and I got the principal immediately and let the principal stay with her for a second so she wouldn't be alone. And then I went to get the counselor. And the counselor told me, "Oh, are you kidding? She's an attention seeker. She's a drama queen. Tell her to see my secretary, and I'll make time for her at the end of the week, maybe on Thursday." This was a Monday. Needless to say, that counselor doesn't work in the district anymore. And thank God the principal and the superintendent jumped in and followed proper intervention protocols. But this is an important message. We all know that there are certain kids in a school that are kind of drama queens and kings, that they are really dramatic, and that they do tend to want attention all the time. But everyone, if a kid is a chronic attention seeker, they're not seeking attention because they're spoiled brats. They're seeking attention because there's a hole inside of them. Somewhere at home, somewhere in their lives, their needs are not getting met in a serious way. And bear in mind, just because a kid is given everything he wants doesn't mean he's getting anything he needs. So if you're ever in a position where you have a student who's a real drama queen or king and always trying to get attention, and you're annoyed, and it's like the little boy who cried wolf, after a while you just don't believe it anymore, think about the little boy who cried wolf. The wolf actually did come. Well, for these kids that get categorized as dramatic, they're not dramatic, and the wolf isn't going to come. The wolf is already there, but that student doesn't know how to articulate to you, no, 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 the wolf is already here. So he acts out instead. Lead with truth and compassion when you're dealing with bullies. The challenge at most schools nowadays, it's worse in the public school system. The Catholic school system is based on compassion, but so often we get caught up in the truth. Dealing with the truth of the bully's behavior, dealing with the truth of appropriate punishment, that we forget about the compassion part. And whenever I'm at a school and I don't know what to do, like with that girl with the bandages, I went on instinct. but I always lead with truth and compassion. I never, ever engage one without the other, because apart they are not powerful as they are together. That kid who drives everybody nuts, who's always crying wolf, who says everything is bullying. Well, she used my pencil, that's bullying. Look beyond the obvious. Be curious. Because if you do that every time, if you can add some enhancements to your curriculum that helps you learn more and have a deeper understanding of your students' lives, if you can engage some compassionate discipline techniques, supplement traditional punishment with opportunities for kids to access their empathy and develop it like a muscle, if you can be creative in detentions and suspensions, maybe the kids spend half that time doing academic stuff and the other half doing deepening of the soul stuff, we'll see bullying-related suicides start to go down. We'll see bullying itself start to go down. And one last note on cyberbullying, digital bullying, text bullying. Everyone always seems to look at what can we do technologically to curb it? What can we do in terms of access for our children? And I think that's kind of backwards, because kids are going to have access to technology no matter what you try to do to prevent it. They are so smart, oh my gosh. In my mind, the technology isn't the problem. In my mind, the problem is that kids are vulnerable to downloading the apps that are just about being cruel, to uploading the videos that are just about being cruel, because they're not being compassionatized at home. They're not being taught compassion. And if a child who isn't taught compassion at home isn't treated with compassion at school when they do wrong, they'll never learn compassion. So if you take a child that isn't compassionate and you discipline him with compassion, you can turn a child around. If not, you're kind of guaranteeing that the bullying is only going to get worse as that child's cry for help turns into a silent scream. If any of you are interested in bringing me into your school, I'm easy to work with. Just shoot me an email or call me on my cell phone. Also, if any of you are struggling with anything at school with bullying, or you just want like a sounding board, please feel free to reach out to me by phone or email. That is a courtesy I afford all NCEA members as a gift. I'm always here for you. I'm never more than a phone call or an email away. Andrea, do you want to take some questions?
Yes, Jodee, thanks. We have a question regarding compassionate discipline. This member has heard you speak before and has tried the compassionate discipline method, and they get pushback from parents about, why aren't you disciplining students who are exhibiting these bullying behaviors? How do you deal with that perception?
Well, first of all, I think part of the challenge is that you're talking about, I'm assuming, the parents of the victims who feel like you're being too soft on the bullies. Part of the challenge there is that sometimes schools will enact these things, but they're not approaching it as effectively from a communications vista as they could. So my recommendation is that you can either communicate with parents as a whole, or you can meet with the parent of the victim. And you can say to the parent of the victim, first you compliment the child and you say, I am so honored that your child is my student. She is gifted and sensitive, and I am so honored to be working with her and to have her in my life. Now, as you know, we've been struggling with some issues with this other student. And then you have to use your discretion. I know there are privacy issues, but if there's anything you can share with that parent about maybe what that student has been going through, even if you can't be specific, even if it has to be something very vague, that that student has been struggling with some challenges. And we are trying, our approach here is that we're a Catholic school. We're Catholic values based. And that we really want, instead of making this angry child who is hurting your daughter angrier, we want to help this child access their compassion so they're motivated to be kinder to your daughter and to all students. So this is what we're going to do. And then ask the parent of that victim, engage that parent. Say, we are all partners in this together. We'd love your idea. We'd love your input. We'd love your feedback. We're going to do the visit to the homeless shelter. Would you like to come with? Engage. If you just do something in a vacuum and you don't tell the parents of the victims what you're doing, they're going to give you pushback no matter what it is. Even I will tell you that even if you were to punish that bully in a way the parent was comfortable with, they'd probably still have some complaint down the line, because the reason they do that is because they're afraid. And when a parent is afraid that they don't have control, they become controlling and they become negative. So if you can engage the parent from the very beginning and engage them and use the word partnership. We want to work with all the parents in partnership to make this better and help the parent understand how you're approaching the bully and why. Then you can often get that parent on board. Additionally, and I've had this come up before where I've had to sit down with parents where schools have started to implement compassionate discipline and I've had problems with the parents. I also tell them that, you know, one of the things I love most about your child is your child's heart, your child's integrity. That's one of the things I like most about you. And quite frankly, one of the greatest gifts we can give our children is to teach them how to forgive with grace and dignity. Yes, we could do traditional punishment on this bully, but then all we're doing is taking a kid who's already in pain, because kids who aren't in pain don't bully. So we're already taking a child who's already in pain and just giving him more pain. We're punishing him more. Instead, we want to rehabilitate him. And then you can tell the parent, and we can explain to your child why we're doing this. Because if you set the example, if the school sets the example of healing, rehabilitation, and forgiveness, and engages the parent as a partner in that approach and says, let's use this as an opportunity to deepen your child, to make your child even more spectacular than she already is, because we want to teach forgiveness. We want to teach compassion. So it's like we're hypocrites. On the one level, we're trying to teach our students compassion, tolerance, and forgiveness, but on the other hand, our first thing that we do is punitive. It's a mixed message. And if you explain it to parents that way, they are often more open. And I do a whole thing. In fact, the NCEA has commissioned me to do a whole series of briefs for you guys. And the first one is coming out like this month or next month. And it's a primer on bullying intervention. This next one I'm doing, I'm writing it now, that's why I have circles under my eyes, is on dealing with challenging parents and getting parents to work with you in partnership. And it has everything, scripted verbiage techniques that you'll find very helpful with this question specifically. But if you engage the parents in the beginning, engage them as partners, and work with them, and I have a whole system for how to document this and get them excited. I have a whole system for this that I can share with you separately if you want to reach out to me. If you can do that, the chances are much stronger that that parent will buy into it. And bear in mind one last thing too, is that there are many parents who are adult survivors of peer abuse. Adult survivors are people who were bullied or invisibilized when they were in school, and they still struggle with the wounds. Now, adult survivors of the bullies are often either very defensive and bullies themselves, or they go into denial. Adult survivors of victims can often overreact and desire punishment more because they're having trouble separating where their past ends and their child's present begins. So one of the techniques you can do, and to the person who asked the question about this parent who's like not satisfied because the compassionate discipline isn't punitive enough for her, you might want to subtly ask that parent, say, you know, I really welcome your feedback. I'd love to know a little bit about your school experience because I think we could gain some insights from there. Tell me about your school experience. Maybe it will help us navigate forward on this. You can do it subtly, because once you find out that a parent is an adult survivor, then you have to completely sort of enhance the approach, and you address it with truth and compassion and say, it seems to me that you're still struggling with some stuff yourself from school. It might be helpful for your son or daughter if you talked it out with someone, because that can also be an obstacle too, is because adult survivor parents are often extremely overreactive and give a lot of pushback because they're reliving their past in their children's present. So knowing that can sometimes be helpful. Just the knowledge itself can make you more sensitive and more enlightened in your approach. Does that help, Andrea?
Yeah, and you're getting some great comments back to that. I'll make sure and share those with you after, but since we're over the hour, I want to get to a couple more questions that we have. One of which is, do you think doing a small group with kids who have been victims of bullying would be beneficial, or is that something that should be done one-on-one?
Well, if you're talking about like a support group or starting a group, I think that's great, but I would never call it like a bullying group or anti-bullying group. I would call it, compassion champions or something like that. I actually have a program called Inja Ambassadors of Compassion, where I make students my ambassadors of compassion in their schools, and they often have activities and poster contests. As far as addressing like bullying situations where instead of addressing one student at a time, you address them in a group, I think that there is no set answer. I think that you have to trust your instincts and your wisdom and judge it based on the individual children. Sometimes, however, kids either freeze up in a group setting or they become overreactive. So I can give you 2 tips on how to make that judgment. Number 1, don't arrange a group without checking with each individual child first. Talk to them first and make sure they're comfortable with it. I do it all the time. When I go into a school and I do my student presentation, at the end, I always have a large group of kids that are in crisis and need intervention. And what I always ask them is I say, would you like to be with a group of other students who are also struggling, or do you just want to talk with me one-on-one? Some of them prefer to be in a group setting, and so I set up a classroom for them. And some of them prefer one-on-one. Let the kids have the option. As adults, we tend to make decisions for kids all the time. Give some of the decision, give some options to the kids. I always tell adults, don't give kids decisions, give them choices. So you make the decision that you're going to talk with these kids, give them the choice within the decision of whether or not they would like to sit with you individually or in a group. And I think that that's probably the most helpful. And the second tip is that there are 2 types of locations in a school, neutral and stigmatized. A neutral location is any location kids don't associate with discipline subliminally. The nurse's office, the teacher's lounge, the media center, a quiet spot on campus. Stigmatized locations are the opposite. The dean's office, the principal's office, the counselor's office. These locations make kids develop a wall. If it's the bully, they'll erect a wall of defensiveness. If it's the victim, they erect a wall of shame. So first of all, ask the students, do you want to be in a group or one-on-one? And then honor what they tell you. And then once you have those answers, plan both types of intervention in a neutral location. That's very important. Next question. I hope that helped.
It does, and we had a couple people ask about this. A response to the popular series 13 Reasons Why, or some of the social media contests that are out there. Should you address those as a guidance lesson or in the school, or should you not, because there may be students who haven't been exposed to it and it will draw more attention to it? What's your opinion on that?
Well, here's what I think. I believe passionately that we should never protect kids from reality, but that we must prepare them for it. So it's I feel that if there's something out there like 13 Reasons where a bunch of kids know about it, then all the kids know about it. I would be stunned if any kids weren't aware of it, even if they were homeschooled. And I would say that I think it's better to address it, but you don't, it's how you address it. You might not necessarily want to address that movie in particular, but you might maybe in social studies, and this is what my curriculum does, by the way, the after school curriculum is that, like, maybe in social studies where you may be studying something that can relate to self-harm or suicide, or maybe it's just in an English class. You ask the kids, like a contemplation question. Have you ever had, let's see, in fact, I can actually, if I'm allowed, I think I have it right in front of me. I do. Hang on 1 minute. Hang on 1 minute. Yes, it's right here. This is a curriculum I just did for a school, and we address this in theme 4. So you could address it subtly, like maybe you have a contemplation question like, when you or someone you know are feeling scared, anxious, or in a dark place inside, and you need help, what do you do and why? And then let them answer that. And then maybe an activity, they answer that question in a notebook, and then here's an activity for this particular theme in my curriculum. Write a letter to yourself in which you list all the things you like most about you. Faculty, you may wish to help them get started by providing some examples or doing the exercises out loud yourself to get them thinking in the right direction. The next time you're feeling down, get out the letter and read it. Try and keep the letter handy so you can keep adding to your list of wonderful things about you. So that's a positive, proactive way to deal with the subject. It's subtle. So if some kids haven't heard about 13 Reasons, they're not going to connect it to that. But if some kids have, they will. And then what's the activity? Write a letter to yourself about all the things you like most about yourself, and then collect those letters. And if any of the letters are really negative, then you're going to know you need to intervene with that child. So there's a lot of ways you can do this. You can even ask the kids, okay, for English class, we're going to do a movie review. Everybody pick a movie that really affected you, and here's how you write a movie review. So there are lots of subtle ways to get to important things without feeling uncomfortable that you've pushed the envelope too far. Does that help?
Yes, thank you so much. And we're going to make that our last question for this evening because we're a bit past the hour. But I want to reiterate that Jodee is very responsive and easy to get a hold of. Her information is displayed here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to her directly. So before we conclude, Jodee, did you have any final words for our audience today?
Yes. First of all, thank you for being here. I mean, I know how valuable time is, and I am so grateful for yours. And even though I can't see all of you, I swear I can feel you inside. And I wish that when I was in school, I would have had one of you as my teacher or my counselor or my principal. My childhood would have been way different. There's nothing you can do about that now. There is something you can do for the kids in your life today. So next time a bully really irks you, help that child, answer the cry for help, and remember that it is. If I can forgive the bullies, anybody can. And I I am here for you. If you need an ear, if you need a sounding board, or if you've just had a bad day and are concerned that maybe you handled a bullying situation the wrong way and you want someone to give you some truth and compassion, please reach out. I am here. And I am so humbled that you are here with me right now. And God bless. And let's make this school year the best one ever.
Well put, and thank you so much for being here with our audience today. And I want to thank our audience for their great participations and their really thoughtful questions. If you have not already, you can quickly download your certificate of attendance from the handout section of your GoToWebinar control panel, or I will also be emailing that to you directly tomorrow with Jodee's recording here, so you'll be able to access this recording and share it with your colleagues as needed. I want to remind you all that you can look for our upcoming webinars at ncea.org, and you can visit Jodee's website at jodeeblanco.com. Oh, thank you all again, and may you enjoy a blessed evening. Thanks for your time.
Bye.